And so we're continuing this discussion of fashion and consumer artistry, commodity artists within consumer culture, and Lady Gaga and her Marc Jacobs suit, this oversized suit. And just to refresh our memory from last time, she made this speech and she said this was an oversized men's suit made for a woman, not a gown. She's talking about trying this suit on. And then I began to cry. In this suit, I felt like me today, she said before revealing that the outfit even helped her finalize her speech. I felt the truth of who I am well up in my gut. And then wondering what I wanted to say tonight became very clear to me. She made her speech in her Marc Jacobs suit. And we have the artists like Lady Gaga or Oscar Wilde presenting this commodity art, this consumer culture, and it's got vectors because it's got a shock. So like you're kind of shocked by Lady Gaga's not wearing of an evening dress, but this other thing. It also gives her a feeling of being at home, a feeling of being herself. So she's able to shock, to have an impact. She's able to feel more herself, and she's touching the deeper patterns of culture. These archetypes Freud and Jung talk about, in her case, justice, sexual justice, womanhood in itself. Um, so good. So she's, I'm arguing, a serious commodity artist. And the sad reality is that we academics, professors, have tended to ignore this consumer culture because, well, we've kind of been reared on Marxist or other ideologies, which tend to have a kind of a snobbery or a kind of elitism against consumer culture. Like, oh, that's entertainment. That's not real culture. Uh, and so, like, where does consumer culture get studied? In the university, it's in the College of Business and in marketing, and people in the humanities tend to like, you know, what's the word? We turn up our nose at those things. Well, that's not real academia, we say. To some extent, it's in the art design. Okay, that's a little more serious, or fashion design. But in any case, it's not as serious as like philosophy and literature, culture. And in I found an article. So there's a book. In fact, the book is called "The Consumption of Culture: Image, Object, Text." So this is a. I was looking around, like, are there any good books on this kind of cultural analysis of consumer culture that's not just pointing to how it's exploitative and you know, sinister? And the books tend to be, as I said, coming out of the marketing department and out of the business college. And so this collection, edited by Anne Birmingham, um, has her like looking at a painting by the painter Watteau, Watteau, called, here's my imperfect French, L'Ancien de L'Enseigne de Jacinthe, or Jacinthe's sign post, like the sign for his store, his art store. He's got this art store. So this is great because it's kind of this conjunction of culture and the market, the art store. And she analyzes how Watteau in this painting is thematizing and kind of bringing it to our attention this linkage that art gets bought and sold, and it's part of our cultural capital and consuming conspicuously. And and so you're looking at the image of the painting, but you're also looking at yourself and ourselves, and that's kind of how art functions in the modern commercial world. So let me see if I can pull up this image in my PowerPoint. Okay, let's see if I can. PowerPoint, slideshow. And here's an image of Watteau's painting. Your Saint's signboard, that is to say, of his art store. This is the inside of the art store, and these people are consuming art. They're buying it. They're looking at it. They're like, oh, I'm going to buy this one, and let's look at this. And he's got this couple here looking at this painting, and they've got different interests, and the female's kind of looking at the entire painting, and the man seems to be kind of looking pretty closely at those naked bodies. I mean, he seems to be, there's an image of nymphs here. Then you have this couple here, and they're looking, and it's cut off in this image, but there's a mirror here, and they're looking at the mirror. So you have these couples looking at the painting, looking at the mirror, these people looking at other paintings, and Watteau is bringing our attention to this consuming of culture, and that you're what are you doing? You're kind of shaping yourself. You're kind of self-creating, in Wilde's term or Nietzsche's term. And this scholar, Birmingham, says this. She says, in this sense, Watteau's painting suggests that what is ultimately at stake in consumption is the production of the subject through self-reflection and desire. The production of the self. So becoming a self, becoming a subject through self-reflection. So you're looking at yourself, and desire, and like, because you're desiring beauty, and sometimes you're desiring a body, like a person on that image. Like sometimes there's an erotic element, sometimes there's just you're moved in another way, tragically. There's an emotional effect of desire. And so you're engaging the intellect, but you're also engaging the desire, what I want, the passions. And Birmingham notes that Watteau and she are kind of doing an un-Marxist reading, because like a Marxist like Frederick Jameson, a kind of famous Marxist theorist, he would want what she says, he would be nostalgic for a more authentic culture, tending to see consumer culture and consumer society as part of the superficial, schizophrenic logic of late capitalism. This nasty, sinister late capitalism, which is schizophrenic. And in some ways it is, but it also is productive of culture and productive of human experience, that where these subjects are kind of becoming subjects and shaping themselves. Let's then look at another painting that does this in Oscar Wilde's case, and this is not a painting by Oscar Wilde, it's a painting of Oscar Wilde. Okay, PowerPoint. And this is going to be a painting by William Powell Frith from 1881, called A Private View at the Royal Academy. And you have Oscar Wilde over here with a top hat. And he's holding forth, and he's surrounded by a covey of women and children, which, is kind of like putting him down in a certain sense, because the serious people are the men, at least traditionally. But Wilde was not afraid to talk to women, and he edited a women's magazine, and he was very much interested in women's things, like including fashions. He didn't kind of look down on those things. Oops. And where's my mouse? There it is. And Wilde is lecturing to them, and they're very interested, and they're looking at the paintings. This is, an image which has some major figures in public life, including the Prime Minister William Gladstone, and Lord Leighton, and John Everett Millais, the famous painter, Anthony Trollope, the famous novelist, Ellen Terry. I think it's here, Ellen Terry, the famous actress, and I think this might be Lily Langtry, I'm not sure. But anyway, famous actresses, famous models, um, and taken all seriously by Wilde. I don't know if Frith is taking them seriously, but he's at least thematizing it. He's giving us a kind of story of the consuming of culture and the consuming of art in this case. And it's great that Wilde is at the center of it, because he was at the center of it. And he is bringing it to our attention as a serious endeavor, where, just as Birmingham was saying, you are self-creating, you are looking at these styles, you are influenced by these styles, you're choosing to be influenced by those styles. And okay, yeah, to some extent, you're like borrowing someone else's style, but you're the one creating, you're the one who's the artist. I mean, there's the artist of the painter and of the model who are kind of influencing with their styles, but then you're bringing in those styles. It's not an oppression to be influenced by other styles, fashions even. Fashion isn't this evil, sinister thing that takes away your freedom, but in fact, it enables it, Wilde would say, ultimately. Marx, on the other hand, I'm picking on Marx here. I like Marx, but I think he's totally wrong on this, where he says, oh, the commodity form is this kind of like mysterious, enigmatic thing that's kind of exploitative, and so we can't trust it, the commodity. And it's true that it has this kind of mysterious, this way of accessing the passions and the desires, like we're talking about. But that's not, I mean, it can be exploitative and it can be positive. And I don't see why Marx has to make it all negative. And other Marxists or people who follow with Marx's analysis, whether that's Foucault or Althusser. And I guess I'm not going to go into it, but there's also like Birmingham mentions Van Gogh's painting of shoes, and the traditional thing is to look at these shoes as an image of the exploitation of the working class, as opposed to a celebration of a commodity that this person has consumed, and now we're looking at it as a work of art, and the person who wore those shoes and wears those shoes is wearing a fashion and expressing themselves through those shoes, authoring themselves, not just being exploited by members of the capitalistic class. Why can't a working class or lower middle class person enjoy fashion or sports as an authentic expression of self, of expressing themselves, of bonding with their tribe, even building on some deep wisdom, though it's an embodied wisdom. It's not just a nice, simple, abstract aspect of wisdom in a Platonic world of ideas. It's earthy. It's connected to the body and the passions of the body. And so these women of fashion, this men of fashion, Wilde and Ellen Terry, and the painters who are creating these paintings are influencing the audience members through these vectors that I'm talking about, the impact, the shock, through shaping the narrative. Like, what am I going to find relevant? How am I going to realize what's relevant in this situation, this state of affairs that faces me, and then also that those Wilde and Ellen Terry and they become a symbol, an icon, a symbol of their age. They have a symbolic valence that is more than just the body. Think about the Batman when he says, like, I wear a mask so that I'm not just a man, but I'm a symbol, and so that I have this bigger effect on the culture. We'll get into Batman another time, but the commodity artist, the consumer sub-creator, to paraphrase J.R.R. Tolkien. And so I want to say a couple things and maybe see if I can use my drawing board. Let me pause pause this for a second. So I'm going to talk about a phenomenological way of thinking about the relationship between subject and object and how the world manifests itself to me. And let's go to the drawing board and see if this works. And so here, let's talk about Maurice Merleau-Ponty, French phenomenologist, who I'm a fan of, and it's wrong, I guess, can I do this? I always do this. Drawing two opposite ways of looking at it, and one is the wrong way, or the sort of more conventional way, where you say, like, there's a mind, and then it grasps the object. It's simple and straightforward, and it's scientific, and it's empirical, and you have an experiment that you can do. And that works for, on a basic level, but it's really, it doesn't really work, because what is consciousness? Consciousness is consciousness real? And I think it's how we get to reality at all. But consciousness is the moment of the self and the object meeting. That there, it's not just this simple grasp of a simple object, but it's more an experience. It's more a phenomenon, and that it's not just an object. In fact, it's more like a state of affairs. It's not just a thing or a couple of things that I grasp, but it's a state of affairs in the sense that there's like a story going on here. There's a process. There's a cause and effect, or many causes and many effects. And when I'm conscious, I'm not just conscious blank. I'm conscious of something. There's always something there. So I don't need to connect mind and body. They're always connected at all moments. And I'm alive. I'm not just kind of static at 1 second. I'm constantly moving through time, and I'm constantly trying to live. It's not just a cogito ergo sum. It's not just a thinking thing. This is the famous quote from Descartes. But there's desire going on here. There's desiring to live. There's desiring, well, sometimes it's desiring sex, sometimes it's desiring to consume something, sometimes it's desiring to be a part of a tribe, and going to the mall to help myself, join that tribe by buying the right styles and fashions. And so this is Merleau-Ponty, and I'm very much paraphrasing him very briefly here. And so how does this function? And as I'm imbibing those styles, as I'm taking in those deep stories, let's put this down on the paper here. There's deep stories that I'm imbibing, and they allow me to see. What? I don't need stories in order to see, you might say. And I'm arguing that no, you can't even see the world if you haven't imbibed stories, so that you can make sense of the various and multitudinous data entering your psyche at any given moment through your eyes and your ears and your feet and your hands and your taste and your smell, and all of these things are only going to make sense if you have preset patterns in you. And so those preset patterns, let's break them into two kinds. One are what I'm going to call biological, and we share these with all other animals. Where like, okay, I need to eat. I'm not just like a thinking thing, I'm an eating thing. And so I have a story of seek food. If I'm a hunter, I'm seeking a deer, let's say. I'm hunting for it, I kill it, I cook it. Um, there's a biological story, a set of patterns that drives how I perceive the world. And so when I'm hunting and I'm like perceiving the world, I'm on the lookout for that small movement through the bush, and then I fix on it, and I can, or or I'm driving down the street and I'm on the lookout for a McDonald's, and I fix on it and I do it that way. Um, so there's these biological. There's also those, reproductive. That's part of biology. There's even like, joining a tribe. That's kind of biological, where I want to be with my fellows. But then there's cultural, and what I'm going to call, in an improper way, but anyway, I'm going to call it languaged. I know that's not a word, but I'm making it up, in the sense that, like, it's not just me and the object. There's a language that allows me to access the object actually, and to actually think. Getting back to what we've seen before, where Helen Keller, she was able to sense objects, but until she had one word, water, she couldn't really think. She couldn't really cogitate. And then she could really perceive the world. I mean, she couldn't see because she was blind, but she could really perceive the world in a super deep way, and she became extremely wise and intelligent, once she starts learning. And so that's through language. And this is where I'm going to agree partly with these people that I've been criticizing, Marx, Althusser, and Foucault, who also points to this languaged, culturalized aspect of our experience. They tend to see it as this sinister power grab by bad people who especially have a lot of money, through their ISAs and their ideological state apparatuses. And there's certainly that in the world. There's certainly are, state apparatuses and other apparatuses. But these things can also be good, and in fact, they're absolutely necessary. Um, where, what? So let's take some of these stories that where these apparatuses function, uh, and let's take the biological fact of reproducing. And so we, as a species, reproduce, and that means there's like stories like the boy meets girl, boy loses a girl, boy gets girl story that has happened millions and millions of times through all kinds of forms of literature and so forth. Um, that's a pattern. That's a story that allows me to understand and make sense of the world in front of me. Or there's stories that represent courage, and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and epic battles, Beowulf, or modern superhero stories, which are so popular for some reason. Well, the reason that they're so popular is because they're doing the same things that we need. That we need these mythic stories, and so that's also a set of patterns that we're going to keep imbibing. um, and so there's even all kinds of there's a huge industry in leadership, and thinking about going like to a bookstore and seeing like this whole business section in leadership, or all these podcasts on leadership, and how much money people spend on this story, this pattern that we want to kind of develop in our own lives. Or then there's, how do I call this? Like Oscar Wilde has a play called The Importance of Being Earnest, which is a very, very funny comedy, his most popular play, great films versions of it. And it's adducing and analyzing this tension between the inner self and the outer mask, which is another story that's pretty universal and that we can all recognize. And this play helps us think through our own tensions in this regard. So anyway, so these are a bunch of things that we can think about as we think about why we have myths, why myths allow us to see and perceive the world, and how Wilde and Tolkien and others are going to help us keep theorizing these ideas, which have tended to be neglected, unfortunately. And so, for these authors, Wilde and Tolkien, the arts and the consumer goods and the consumer art that I've imbibed allows the world to manifest itself to me meaningfully. And this is contrasted with some existentialist thought. And Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, how did it go? Existence precedes essence. Okay, let's think about that for a second. I'm going to go back to the drawing board, as is my wont. You might get tired of my drawings, but that's tough because I like drawing. And existence precedes essence. And what Sartre is doing here is reversing the traditional scholastic meaning like from the Middle Ages, the Christian philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, who would say the opposite, that essence, which is like the formal, the form of the thing, the idea, the ideal reality of the thing, like in Plato's world of ideas, that's the real thing, that's the thing that precedes the existence of the thing, that's like the actual existing of the thing. And that now Sartre and his confreres are saying, no. Existence, like just the bare fact, is what starts us off, and afterwards the human imposes this fake form, pattern on it. And that's this narrative that's sinister that we needed to some extent for Sartre. And honestly, I'm not an expert on Sartre, so I'm kind of just playing with these ideas, but I think I'm getting this right. And so what does Sartre say? Sartre says this in his book, Existentialism is a Humanism. He says, man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. This is the part where he defines himself, says Sartre. And that's defining him with this form or this story or this narrative that is kind of a fiction. And there's a certain truth in that there's a fiction there, and that, how do I say this? I mean, he's right to some extent. And he's right to focus on the fact that a person freely does this. You're free. And Sartre really, to his credit, really focuses on human freedom. And I love that idea. I want to focus on human freedom. But where does Sartre go wrong, according to me, which is, of course, the truth, is where he ignores the thick network of real relations in the person and the person's state of affairs. A person isn't just a mind in a vat or an atom among other atoms. ATOM. Excuse me, let me get a quick swig here. Allergies acting up. Um, but but no, that I'm uh, I'm embedded in a thick network of relationships. Let's put that at least briefly down here in these relationships, and these are partly how I am able to make sense of the world, including my relationship to my own language, which I didn't invent, and someone else, and in fact millions of people have used that language before me, and they're limiting me and controlling me. This is where Althusser and Foucault are right. These languages are limiting me and controlling me, but not in a sinister way. Uh, they could be in a sinister way, especially if they're like really ideological. But uh, no, they allow me to make sense of the world, and I need to borrow that 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 limitation. Uh, Another way of putting this is, Sartre is going to say with Heidegger that we're thrown into the world, but we're not just thrown; we're embedded in this thick network of real relationships, which allow me to think. Again, that Helen Keller moment where she gets the word and that allows her to think. Before that, she couldn't really think. She could sense things. She could see like, oh, there's something there. There's a doll there, and I can spell out the word doll. But until she got logos, until she got language, she could not really think. She couldn't really learn anything. So we don't want to be suspicious of the power of language, or the power of these myths, or the power of these rituals, which shape our thinking. They enable our thinking. They enable me to self-create. Um, Whether that's like Lady Gaga and her using the previous discourse of the language of that suit, of the fashion of that suit, that allows her, that limits her, but that allows her to make her statements. That social script is not an evil thing. It's a good thing. Um, or thinking about other people besides um, Lady Gaga, um, and this seems like a big leap, but think about Buddha. Okay, Lady Gaga's not Buddha, but they have this similarity, as Wilde would tend to point out, where they're like this consumer artist who's creating a story and a set of images and a set of fashions which influences millions of people, and then the Buddha tells his story, people imbibe it in, they create millions of statues of the smiling Buddha or the different forms of Buddha, and they reproduce his texts and they reproduce his fashions, if you want to call it that, whether that's through the monks who shave their heads and like express themselves through these ways of behaving, or through lay Buddhists who just exercise the different Buddhist ideas. Um, but yeah, he's building serious cultural messages through consumer culture, like Lady Gaga, like Oscar Wilde, enabling a new vision of human fullness, a new mythos, tapping into something. Because if you're tapping into something, that means there's something there. That Lady Gaga knew that there was something there. That Buddha knew that there was something there, latent, a pattern built into the people's psyches that resonates. And we academics, we tend to pretend that we're not allowed to investigate those patterns because there's something kind of fascistic about them or something, because they limit and control. No, that's not fascistic. That's not. I mean, it can be fascist, but it's certainly not usually. And yeah, we need to get into the right hemisphere of of seeing these broader patterns, and perceiving them, and cultivating our capacity to see these things, so that we have a more radical openness to these patterns, a new state of consciousness. I mean, people who do psychedelics, I have never done psychedelics. I don't know if I ever will, but I hear that a lot of scientists are saying that this is one way of accessing the right hemisphere more powerfully, so that you're like really open to like patterns which aren't even there, and you start seeing like things which aren't there. You're hallucinating, but you're also seeing sometimes patterns, and you're seeing things, and the world jumps out at you in a very meaningful way, almost like when we were children. And and so you're seeing that the world is not flat. Um, it has meaning. It's not just sitting there. That it's alive, and that I'm perceiving the meaning. And what do I mean by flat? I mean like Sartre might say, and I'm using him as my little bad guy here for a second, like that there's just this flat existence until the human imposes something from the outside. There's just this existence. It's just flat, and then essence is when the human kind of fakes it and puts something that's not there. But I think that's wrong. I think that's imagining that the world of material things is just this dead stuff, and it's just inert. And there happens to be consciousness, like bubbles of consciousness, like me. I'm a bubble of consciousness, and you, and maybe even like animals, and but they don't. These consciousnesses we don't really know, and maybe we don't have any connection to the material reality of this dead stuff that's just sitting out there dead. No, I just think that's a bad analysis, a very unlikely analysis, that the world is made of dead stuff with bubbles of consciousness that is not connected to it. No, it's all connected, and it all means something, and we need to cultivate our capacity, our openness to that meaning, so that it's gonna like jump out at us and grab us, and engage my intellect and my passions and all of the above. So that's what we're going for.